Today's conversation is really interesting because we're going to be talking about the most underrated rap album of all time, and we literally have so much to choose from, so it's not going to be an easy choice to make. But guys, let us know down in the comments, what do you think is the most underrated album of all time? And hit that subscribe button for more hip-hop conversations. And also, we have our audio podcast launched right now. It's available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts if you guys do want to check it out. It's all based around music recommendations, and there's new episodes every Tuesday. But let's get into this. What to you makes an album underrated?
That's a great question. I mean, you could obviously find so many hidden gems within the hip hop genre. I mean, the genre has been alive for practically like 5 decades now plus. So, I mean, there's a lot of material you could go for. But, I mean, I kind of came into this episode bringing in the ones that were super underrated for me. So, especially being within like the hip hop Twitter community and, going through Reddit forums and looking at the debatable lists and seeing, rate your music and Pitchfork and stuff like that. I wanted to choose some albums that don't necessarily get the love that they deserve.
So let me ask you this. Did you base it more on like, okay, you know what? This album has gotten shat on. It's gotten fucking horrible reviews. So because of how poor the reception is, I have the opposite emotions towards it? Or was it more of a case of like, you know what? These albums that I'm talking about don't even get put up in these lists. Like, they don't even get talked about. Like, what was kind of that decision for you?
I mean, I would go with ones that were underrated to me. Ones that, like, let's say I would ask people about certain conversations, our top 10 lists, or let's say, those types of hip-hop debates. These albums don't necessarily always come into conversation. So I brought in some from different eras. I brought in one from the 2010s. I also brought in another one from the 2000s. And I also brought in one from the 90s. Kind of just being, like, more of what I think is the most underrated of, like, those types of decades.
I feel you. Let's start off with, like, what are the most underrated albums that are popular?
Okay,
like some mainstream ones. Like, do you have anything that comes to mind? I mean, one of the ones that I think of is "Views" by Drake, and I don't want to talk about it too much because it is one of the best-selling rap albums ever, but it's more underrated in the sense that so many people took years for it to grow on them, and I feel like it still doesn't get like the love it deserves in terms of being one of the upper echelon albums in his catalog.
I know that's a good conversation. Another album that I think of when I talk about the popular rap albums and stuff like that, and it's kind of a bit cheesy to bring into this episode because it's like an underrated episode. And we're talking about Drake and now Eminem is actually Relapse.
Yeah.
I mean, Relapse does not get the love it deserves, in my opinion. In my opinion, I might get flamed for this. I genuinely do think that this is a top 3 Eminem album of all time, from the content matter to the production styles produced by Dr. Dre, even the iconic moments throughout the album. I do feel like it's an overhated album, not underrated. It's kind of overhated in the sense that like people feel like the lyrics have aged poorly, or it doesn't get stacked up against the rest of his catalog. But let's go through some underrated picks, bro. What do you got?
I mean, Crash Talk by Schoolboy Q is another one that is from more of a mainstream rapper, but I feel like Oxymoron and the Blank Face LP get their flowers, but Crash Talk doesn't really get the same treatment, and I'm not too sure why. I mean, when you're looking at this album, it's definitely Q's most introspective. It's definitely an album that really saw Q take a detour, try out some more sonically diverse stuff, some more psychedelic beats on songs like Dangerous with Kid Cudi. That was awesome. Even seeing a song like Attention and getting Q into this vulnerable bag where he's rapping about, getting the validation he's always been seeking from people like Jay-Z and Nas and like his heroes growing up. Like, this album really made us see Q in a different light.
It definitely is one of the more underrated popular albums.
No one talks about it anymore,
the 2010s.
bro.
I know, it's pretty
like,
crazy.
I get it. It has Chopsticks on it with Travis Scott, which is a whack song, but I mean, you're going to make 1 or 2 songs off of a project. You're going to make it be a forgotten album? I don't see why.
It got the reception and love it deserved at the beginning, but you're right. A lot of people don't talk about it even in like their 2019 lists, which is actually pretty crazy. But yeah, like you were saying, songs like Gang Gang or even Tales, like I do have memorable, tracks within that album. So I agree with you. I think that's a good pick. But listen, first album that I'm going to bring in today that I think is extremely underrated, that I think is one of the best that the genre has ever produced, is actually MED's Push Comes to Shove. And this was actually released in 2005 of May, and it comes from the Oxford rapper MED. And if you guys are fans of Madlib and J Dilla type production, this is going to be your playground. I mean, MED's fucking rapping throughout this whole project is top tier. You're not going to find a single fucking mislapse in any of his rhymes, in any of his deliveries. He comes in with so much aggression and so much calculation on tracks like Serious or even something like Push, where you get that iconic J Dilla beat, and it just sounds fantastic. And the reason why I think this is underrated, when people talk about the best of the 2000s, this rarely comes into conversation. When you want to talk about albums that were produced by J Dilla or Madlib, the album still doesn't come into
doesn't,
conversation.
bro.
And MED as a whole is super underrated because, yes, while he is a lyrical and conscious rapper, especially for the time that he was coming through, people don't include him in their top 10 list. People don't ever talk about him being underrated as a whole. I feel like especially the new generation has to get hip to his music just because of what he was doing back then and how unique this soundscape sounds.
I was hoping you would bring this in just because this is an album that I was also like unfamiliar with until I think you played it in the studio. You ran through maybe like 4 or 5 songs from it, and I was actually mind blown. I'm like, fuck, bro, this sounds amazing. And I'm yet to go through it, but is it really like entirely produced by Jay Dilla and Madlib and
Yeah, absolutely.
and like this A level class of producers?
Everything, bro. Like
Nuts.
this is top tier producing and top tier rapping.
Yeah.
You can't get anything better. And I mean, listen, produced by Madlib, produced by Oh No over here. This was produced by Madlib, produced by Madlib, produced by Madlib. Like it's really one of those track lists where you're gonna find incredible sample flips, one of the best in the genre. And I think that, often when you talk about Madlib, the whole Mad Villainy conversation comes through, or even Freddie Gibbs's catalog comes to conversation, but this album has to be in
That's
conversation.
an amazing one. You know what? If we're going to go with the 2000s, I did bring one from the 2000s, and this is one that, again, does not get conversations based on it for all-time lists, for 2000s lists, for conscious rap, for concept albums, because that's really what it is an amazing concept album, and it's actually Disposable Arts by Masta Ace, and this came out in 2001, and Masta Ace is an amazing New York rapper that never really gets his flowers, and he was actually one of Eminem's mentors going into the game.
Oh,
and
that's cool.
What's cool is that, like, Eminem was influenced by Masta Ace. When you go through this album, you're going to start to hear the influence that Eminem ended up having on Masta Ace. So it's cool how it kind of came full circle in terms of inspiration. And you get Masta Ace reciting some lyrics from Who Knew. You get some flows that sound similar to some Marshall Mathers LP flows as well. But this album just feels like a complete experience. And he has an amazing knack for storytelling, for wordplay. And the concept of this album is genius because it follows the story of a guy who goes from the streets to jail. Then he gets released from jail and he wants to change his path around, and it's filled with certain skits, and you find out that, I don't want to reveal too much, but he ends up enrolling in a school which is called the IDA, which is the Institute of Disposable Arts, and the programs that they offer include rapping, graffiti art, DJing, and breakdancing. And
So the 4 pillars of rap.
yes, the 4 pillars of hip hop, and it's a satire on the hip hop industry.
Okay, interesting.
And he's going into how a lot of industry people are selfish and don't have the artist's best interest in mind. And the way that he rolls out the album from song to song is genius. It's super well done. And if you guys haven't checked it out, please do yourselves the favor because it is some of the best rapping that you'll hear on a 2000s album. There's even a song on here called Alphabet Soup where he's literally, the whole rhyme scheme is him rapping about doing a carjacking, but using in alphabetical order A to Z for the rhyme scheme. It's really like top-notch level stuff, bro.
That's crazy. Okay, I'm going to have to go through that. But listen, another album that I wanted to bring in today, and this is actually going to please my New York fans, is 3001, A Laced Odyssey by Flatbush Zombies.
Good pick.
And listen, Vacation in Hell was a commercial success for them. It's arguably their biggest album, but this is really what set it off for them. And this was released back in 2016, one of the best albums of 2016, to be quite honest with you. And I could have gone with the earlier mixtape, but I do feel like people sleep on Flatbush as a whole. And this is the perfect display of chemistry and brotherhood through Eric, through Juice, and through Michi. And throughout this whole track list, you're going to find this beautiful concept album of the Odyssey ringing out through each and every single track. And it's probably one of the best psychedelic hip-hop albums that I've ever listened to. Again, when people talk about the 2010s decade, people overlook Flatbush as a whole just because, especially from the New York scene, you had A$AP doing their thing. Joy was making a big splash, but these guys were building one of the craziest cult fan bases that I have ever seen, and I've witnessed the impact of this album live on certain people in my life and the way that they carried out their lives, and the whole mentality of being a free spirit and really being your own person in the world and trying to understand everything throughout your third eye vision is perfectly executed throughout the whole track list. And Eric as a whole, bro, is just an incredible producer, bro, and easily one of the best produced psychedelic albums that I've ever heard.
Yeah.
So what do you want to start with, bro? R.I.P.C.D., bro, Bounce,
Your
Fly
favorite
Away.
rap song, bro, might be the one for me. Like, that one is just...
Even This Is It, New Phone, Who Dis, bro. Good Grief, bro, is easily one of the most underrated songs on this album. So I wanted to bring it in because I don't see Flatbush getting their zombies, Flatbush Zombies getting their flowers as they deserve. And I've had so much time to live with this project. It's underrated to me and my heart. It might not be underrated in Brooklyn, but on a worldwide scale, I feel like more people have to have a conversation of what they did in the 2010s.
And I feel like that's the case for a lot of like New York groups, is that they don't really get the love they deserve. Same thing for a group like the Underachievers that have put out great material, but a lot of them kind of just never really catapulted to the mainstream, I would say.
But that's the thing, though, is that like this is kind of like Antisystem music in the way where like they kind of wanted to go against the mainstream and go against like you having to sell your soul throughout the album, and those are topics that they touch upon within the writing. And I find that interesting because they definitely had the talent and energy to be able to create these mainstream records, and they're fantastic writers and the production's fantastic. There's literally no blemishes within their artistry, and I respect their artistry too because throughout their whole career they've only catered to their community. And I feel like that's what you need to do, bro, within rap music, is really just hone in and focus in on the people that are loving your music and the people that want to stay there. And obviously they had their mainstream records like a Bounce or like a Palm Trees, for example, but this album is phenomenal. I mean, whenever it comes up in the conversation, people are always like, oh, fuck, it's true. Like, this album is incredible. And then the conversation starts. But I feel like it's always an album that I have to bring into a conversation, you know, especially for the 2016 year. So I'm not sure if you guys find this underrated, but I do think it's an underrated album.
Listen, I'm going to give one more underrated pick, and then I'm down to move on to our definite underrated, like best underrated album of all time. So American Corruption by Capital Steez is really up there for me. One of the best mixtapes of that blog era in the 2010s. A project that never surfaced on streaming services up to this point, but I'm dying to get it on there just because of how many classic songs there are on it. And I just love that idea of Capital Steez rapping over these classic MF Doom beats and Madlib beats. And it was just, to me, this is the ultimate album for a hip-hop nerd because that's what Capital Steez is emitting throughout the project. It's him showing his love for hip-hop, showing his love for wordplay, for the art of different rhyme schemes. And you'll find amazing songs on there like Dead Prez. You'll find Free the Robots. And Capital Steez really just being super deep, bro. It feels like you're having deep conversations with a friend about the apocalypse and the end of the world and what the government has planned for us. And really a lot of shit that most rappers are afraid to touch. Like, it's like there's certain topics I feel like in hip-hop that if you want to appeal to the masses and want to get those industry pushes, like, you got to stay away from some of these topics. Like, people don't want you rapping about certain things that Capital Steez was getting into on here. And I think that with that mixtape alone, he proved that he is one of the best MCs for that time. And it's just a shame that we only got that project as a full solo body of work for him.
But I think that's the mistake of the project, is that, like, he left everything on the table through that mixtape, bro. And I think even talking to so many people about that whole pro era and like Flatbush Zombies push, you know, in New York, you know, this is one of the projects that really led that and that had that quality. And if you really pay attention to his writing, it's some of the most advanced writing you'll ever listen to in the genre. So I like that pick, but what do you say, bro?
Let's do some honorable mentions. I had 3 Feet High and Rising by De La Soul because that just came out on streaming. Amazing album. I had Book of Ryan by Royce da 5'9". I had The Ecstatic by Mos Def. I had The Easy Truth by Sky Zoo.
I had Undone by The Roots. I also had As God Intended by Chez Noir. That's super underrated.
But what was the number one for you, though?
Okay, listen, I am not sure if this is underrated, but I feel like it is to me. Because
it's supposed to be the most underrated of all time. It's got to be underrated.
To me, you know, because you can have the conversation that, oh, this album got its flowers, but I feel like Moment of Truth by Gangstar, bro,
W.
Like, listen, I'm going to explain to you why I feel like this is the most underrated album of all time.
It is a classic, though. I feel like it does have that certified classic.
It has a certified classic, but when we have New York conversations, especially within, let's say, our generation, right? Biggie comes up, Nas comes up, people debate Jay-Z's catalog all the time.
Guru, not so much,
bro,
right?
Guru, not so much. And when you have to even talk about people like Big L or even, let's say, people like Big Pun, like, they have their flowers, bro, and people are giving it to them. But, bro, like this...
Big Pun, not always.
Well, Capital Punishment...
That's another one.
Capital Punishment got its flowers, and it had mainstream success. It did. It did have mainstream success. That album was fucking selling.
I don't see it in enough lists.
Anyways, so with Moment of Truth, bro, I really do feel like the chemistry of the rapper, Guru, and, you know, Primo's production is unparalleled, bro. This is some of the best hip hop material you will get of all time. And if I had to create my top 10 list, bro, this would be here. I'm telling you, this
Top
would
10 albums of all time,
like,
but it didn't make your list.
if
Though.
I
We
had to,
did the list.
no, I
though.
mean for like New York, and like if I had
Okay.
to do some of my personal favorites and digging. And the reason why I feel like this is an underrated album for me is because you're getting songs in here like Moment of Truth, or let's say a work Above the Clouds, JFK to LAX, and
Classics.
like, bro, classics upon classics. And I mean, I've never heard anyone from our generation at least put this next to The Ready to Die. He's never put this against the Omatics, never put this with the Reasonable Doubts, but this is easily one of the strongest albums in the 90s. I'm sorry, bro. Going from track to track, you're going to find top-tier lyricism from Guru all the way through. Not only that, but when I re-listened to the album, bro, he low-key had one of the best flows and cadences, bro, to ever grace hip-hop.
It was smooth, it was soft, but it was just...
It was punctual, bro.
Yeah.
Like it almost felt definite. And like that's what I feel like this album brings to the table is just quality from start to finish. This is a 10 on 10 album, and I think it's underrated, bro, at least to my stance. I mean, I know it gets the flowers it deserves and it has super high ratings, but when you have to talk about, like, let's say for us and our conversations and what I'm seeing through blogs and forums and what I'm seeing on the online community, I don't see much.
And that's respectable, because like if you really were to narrow it down to like the most underrated album of all time, it's probably some guy named Teddy living in Wisconsin that we've never fucking heard about. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, that's the whole point of being underrated, is that it's not getting rated. It's not being put into conversations. Like it's something that's unknown to most people most of the time. But amazing pick, one of my favorite rap albums of all time as well. So that's a good one. But I brought in Below the Heavens by Blue and Exile, and I've spoken about the album before when we did our best albums from the 2000s decade. But to me, this has always been like the West Coast Illmatic, in the sense that it really is one of the most lyrically dense West Coast albums. And I feel like, especially coming out in the 2000s decade, this was a breath of fresh air, because you still had a lot of gangster rap that was dominating the market, but this one really made an impact. It really affected a lot of people, just because you're getting this stance from Blue, who is just glistening and sliding over these super soulful beats from Exile, and it just sounds like perfection, bro. And what's cool too is that he also he tried to throw in a couple of like more party and dance tracks, like Juice and Dranks, for example, where it has a nice groove to it, and you're like, you know what, I don't see this getting radio play, but for what they were trying to go for, it's a solid track. And all throughout this album, it's just that perspective of Blue being this underdog, and, you know, not being a cap rapper, not, you know, rapping about a life that he doesn't lead. It's really honest, and it's kind of a coming to age album too, about him kind of falling into manhood and putting all of his time and all of his effort into this pursuit of being a rapper,
It's an incredible
and having
album.
to take bus rides, bro, having to really grind to get around. And he was bruising mics, bro. Like every single song on there, on a lyrical standpoint, is fucking phenomenal.
It's a perfect album.
From the Narrow Path to the Blue Collar Worker, like it's flawless, man. It's really one of the ones that I feel like should be heard by more people, and should have won a Grammy. Should have fucking, you know, had the flowers that other West Coast albums have gotten, just because even when you think about West Coast hip hop, you wouldn't even loop this into that scene.
Yeah, it goes against the grain. Like it
Yeah.
sounds more like a New York or Brooklyn.
That's what I
type
love
of,
about
like
it.
hip hop album. Yeah, and you know, I think that's so interesting because they never really got the flowers they deserve. But I mean, within the hip hop community, at least on Twitter, I have seen people talk about it, and I'm happy that people are becoming aware of the album just because of the quality behind it. But what's interesting is that for my pick, I actually just saw this. I never knew Moment of Truth went gold, bro. That's interesting.
Really?
Yeah, it went
Wow.
gold. Wow, that's fucking interesting.
Yeah,
But,
mind you, even like 3 Feet High and Rising, that also went platinum this year.
Oh, really? Did it
so
go?
yeah, it took time, but yeah, it definitely it landed at least.
But like, what are more like super low key picks? Like certain picks that like people really wouldn't like know about. You know?
super low key picks? There's so many. I mean, Retropolitan by Sky Zoo. That's another one that's been in rotation heavily for me. One that people know about that doesn't get enough love is Drop Top Wop by Gucci Mane, bro.
That's another big one
That's
as well.
That's one of Gucci's best projects ever. To me.
Absolutely. Even the Color Blue
Color
by
Blue,
D2. Yeah,
D2X.
that's a massive fucking project, bro. I mean, D2X is rapping his ass off throughout the entire album, and I think you included in your top 10 list, right, for the 2021.
There's a lot of great underrated albums 2021. There was even Don't Go Telling Your Mama by Topaz Jones. Like,
There was quality
so
this
much.
year. Another one that I wanted to bring in was actually Channel 21 by Mark Lux. This was an album that really, like, I feel like no one knows about, but I think everyone should give a listen just because Mark Lux is tapping into his conscious and tapping into his life and laying it all throughout the album. And I think Mark Lux is easily one of the most underrated, rappers in the game right now. But
Facts.
how do you feel about my selections, bro? What do you got,
It's
man?
good, bro. Honestly, I agree with everything. I mean, the Relapse one is true. People fucking continue to shit on that album and say that it was, the prime time of Eminem's downfall, which I couldn't agree with any less. But yeah, you made solid picks, bro. And
You too, man.
yeah, I think it was a pretty cool episode. But guys, let us know, how did you enjoy our selections? What did you think about our ultimate most underrated album? And again, let us know what you guys chose. Hit the subscribe button if you're new to the channel. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one.